headquarters in Montreal now. Abigail.
Well, Donna, I'm going to bring in a special guest. We're joined by Liberal strategist Greg MacEachern. And Greg, I'm going to throw to you the question that everybody's really been asking all night. Liberal minority, we're back to where we were 6 weeks ago. Is that a win for the Liberals?
It's definitely a win.
Okay.
And I can tell you that although this is a very quiet room due to current circumstances, there are a lot of staff throughout the building and they're very happy. Looking at what some of the numbers might have been. And I think, it's smart to have a so-called conservative approach to polling. They were looking at the more conservative numbers. So they might have been expecting 144, 145. So from the Liberal campaign point of view, they're very pleased.
And we talk a lot about, voters who were frustrated by an election call or, didn't feel like they wanted to have another election at this time. How do you feel that that's played into what we're seeing so far tonight?
Admittedly, I was one of the people that was struck by how long that lasted. In 2008, Prime Minister Harper went early. Didn't seem to be as big of an issue. We've had other pandemic elections in Canada, but it stuck for a while. I think the problem might have been for the opposition leaders. They stuck with it a little too long. A pollster I talked to last week suggested that Canadians kind of moved on. It's kind of like those people on December 24th complaining about buying Christmas presents. It's inevitable. The election's coming, so what else do you have besides saying this is an unnecessary election? So I think the opposition leaders may have held on to that a bit too long.
And just briefly, I want to wrap by asking you about the leader. Lots of questions about whether Justin Trudeau should stay on or would stay on or will he stay on. Of course, he's not entertaining that speculation. Will you at this point? What do you think the next steps are for him?
I would point to people the pivot point of the election in that first debate, the French debate, where Mr. O'Toole said something about assault weapons and Justin Trudeau heard it and caught it and mentioned page 90. The 5 days following that, as you would know, Mr. O'Toole had to answer questions about assault weapons. They were knocked off message. And I think that kind of gave traction to the Liberal campaign where they were able to get out from under the talk of the unnecessary election. I think that was a real pivot point. And there's no one else you can credit for that. There's not an ad. There's not a pithy tweet. It was the Prime Minister during that debate. And I think the campaign owes him a lot for that.
All right. Thank you so much for your insights, Greg MacEachern. We'll send it back to you.
All right, Abigail, thank you. You are watching our commercial-free coverage of Decision Canada live on Global, and we're back in a moment. Hello and welcome to our viewers and listeners joining our live coverage of this 44th Canadian federal election. It is now just after 12 a.m. Eastern Time. The Liberals have been elected to another minority government. It's déjà vu all over again, practically. The Liberals leading are elected in 156, the Conservatives in 123, the BQ in 29, the NDP 28, and the Green Party 2. Let's go to Robin Gill at the NDP headquarters in Vancouver. Robin, if you're going to look for victory in these numbers, really the NDP have gained over last time. I'm sure not the gains that they were hoping for. And yet, Jagmeet Singh will be an influence on this minority government.
Donna, he certainly has some power with respect to this so-called victory that you talk about. But what he's going to do now is he's going to push his agenda, and that agenda is to tax the rich. We're joined now by Jenny Kwan. She was just re-elected at Vancouver East for the NDP. Is this a win on that front, taxing the rich?
Well, for us, what is important, of course, is to bring some balance to address some of the inequalities that exist in our society. We saw through the pandemic, there's so many inequitable situations going on. And so what we've campaigned on, what our leaders campaign on, is to bring some measures in place, including making the ultra-rich pay a little bit more, making sure that they pay their fair share. We want to make sure that we have adequate housing for everyone, so that housing is a basic human right. Farmer care should be a thing that is a reality now. But still, after so many decades, the Liberals promised it, and we still don't have it. Childcare. Instead of having this election, we could actually be implementing $10 a day childcare instead. So there's much that we have to do, but certainly bringing the changes in taxation for the ultra rich to pay their fair share is an important goal.
But the reality is that we could be back on the campaign trail in about 2 years. Is that enough time to implement something like that?
Well, you know, the thing is that we don't even have to be in an election in 2 years, right? Right now, we actually, in fact, this election didn't need to take place. We're really basically at where we were. Instead of spending all this time and $600 million on an election that nobody wanted except for Mr. Trudeau, we could have been doing all of this work, fighting for Canadians, making changes that are so important, especially through the pandemic.
Okay, Jenny, thank you for your time. And of course, we will be hearing from Mr. Singh as soon as we hear from Mr. O'Toole. Donna?
All right. Thanks so much, Robin. Let's go to Eric Sorensen in the Results Center. Eric, what are you looking at?
Well, I mean, it's hard not to look at those numbers, the 157 to 122, and say, well, that's a pretty big victory. They're counting the votes right now. Total votes have been about 8 million have been counted so far. There's a lot of votes still to be counted tomorrow with mail-in ballots, etc. But it is interesting that what they've tallied so far, the Conservatives have about 190,000 more votes in their column than the Liberals do, but they are 25 seats behind. It's just the nature of how efficient the Liberal vote is, or inefficient the Conservative vote is, in terms of spreading it out enough to see. It's, they used to talk about it's the economy, stupid. It's the seats, stupid. Like, it's really what it comes down to. The Liberals have got to figure out where to win the seats, even if they're not winning the popular vote. The other thing I want to point out about the numbers, 157, 122, it looks like a carbon copy of 2 years ago. It's not really. I mean, David talked about a couple of seats that had switched. There are lots of those. There are about 35 seats across the country that have switched. So, for example, down in Windsor-Tecumseh, next to Windsor West, sorry, I went a little too far. It's right about here. That was a Liberal riding that has now turning